Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Soul Sessions. Soul Sessions is a space where we want to explore questions of faith and have people share through their personal experience and stories the question of why they chose Jesus. In today's session, we're going to talk to Captain Odessa Smith from Henderson, North Carolina. So, Odessa, thank you for joining us today. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to just share some of your story, share your experiences, your faith walk. I do just want to start out by asking you, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are.
Okay. I started attending the Salvation Army when I was about 4 years old in Richmond, Virginia. And it was just what I was supposed to do at that age. I would go to church with my brother. The rest of my family wasn't going at that time. Went there, became a junior soldier, learned about the Army, learned about God, and then we moved to North Carolina, kind of running from a domestic violence situation. We moved to North Carolina when I was about 11, and found the Red Shield there. So started attending the Salvation Army in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I would say that the Red Shield has always been a constant for me.
Okay.
That's what I refer to it as. Anywhere I go, anything I went through, I could always look for the Red Shield. And of course, that's where I first met Christ is in the Salvation Army. So it's a little crazy, but the only church I've ever been to is the Salvation Army. I've never been to another service at another church besides a wedding or a funeral. So it's basically all I know. So everything that I do know about Christ, I have learned in my time in the Army. So I was one of those kids that grew up in church, and I knew that's what you were supposed to do. But then in my teenage years, of course, like a lot of us do, there were so many other things grabbing for my attention at that time. So I stopped going to church for a while, for a few years, and I had gotten to a point in my life where I felt like I had done so much that I didn't know if, I thought I had gone so far from God's grace. I don't think I really understood what grace was at that time in my life. Had my children but then I was reminded of the scripture in Corinthians that says that love keeps no record of wrongs. And it was through that and through just thinking about the grace of God and the fact of, looking at the stories in the Bible, the things that people have been through, Paul, before he was converted, and so many stories in the Bible. And I just had to get to a point where I was so convicted. I would send my kids to church, and I didn't go because I thought, God's okay with that. Them kids are going, even if I'm not going, at least they're going. But it finally came to a point where I was putting them on the church van on Sunday mornings, and I would sit there and just cry because I didn't feel worthy enough to go to church. So I remembered that scripture, and I remembered the stories in the Bible, and eventually got back into church. I was probably out 4 or 5 years. Once I got back into church, everything just felt right.
Okay.
It felt like the pieces of the puzzle were coming back together. I eventually started teaching Sunday school, Corps Cadets, and was the Sunbeam leader in our Corps in Wilmington. And I just got a better understanding of, if I want to teach my kids to live for Christ, then I have to be that example for them. And then I guess that's where my love for kids came from, is that we were kids are, I guess, the new Christians, and being around kids, and kind of like the ARC ministry too, is that they come into that new faith, and it kind of restores our faith. Gives us a glimpse into what a new Christian looks like,
right.
What it's like to be born again. So that's basically how my teenage years went. And then I was at a point in my life where this has to be part of my story.
Sure.
But I was at a point in my life where I was fine being a single mom, going to church, because I knew that I was the bride of Christ. I didn't need a man to fulfill anything in my life. I was a strong, independent woman.
So at this time, you were a single mom at this point.
Yes,
Okay.
I was a single mom.
And God spoke that into you.
Yes, and
Wow.
God told me, because I had been looking for love, but it was, of course, in the wrong places. And I had to get to a point in my life where I was content with me. When I was like completely okay being a single mom, being independent. And it wasn't until I got to that point that God put my husband in my life. And one of the first things that I can remember, which this is probably part of his story too, is that when I met him, I said, one of the first things, everybody at church has to like you. I was like, it's all going to depend on you go to church and see how they like you.
They like you.
Yeah, because he
no
was
pressure.
Yeah, not at all. And I was at a corps with like all these retired officers who had been principals at the training college and everything. So I was like, yeah, of course, not everybody's going to like him. But then he came to the corps eventually after we had been talking for a while, and everybody loved him. So I felt like that was God's sign. He was saying, this is it. This is the right one for you. And it just, every step and point in my life that I've been on in this journey has been confirmed through the Bible, through scriptures. And I think the great part about it is that God never gave up on me. And I wouldn't say I gave up on God, but there were times when maybe I thought I knew better than what his plans were. My life verse is Romans 8:28, where it says, we know that all things work for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. And it was crazy because growing up, I was like, I'm gonna be just like my corps officers, and the Vincents were probably one of my biggest inspirations, Mike and Judy, and I wanted to be just like her. And there were so many times when she would shield me from things that were going on around me that I didn't know at the time. But I look back and I know that that's what she was doing. But I wanted to be, just like her when I grew up. But then once I had done all these things in my life, I was like, there's no way I can, live up to that. Like God's not ever going to put me, I'm not worthy of that calling. So for so many years, I ran from it. But the conviction that brought me back, the same God that I was having that conviction about, also gave me the confirmation that that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So
that's beautiful. You kind of answered one of the questions I was going to ask you next is, how does it feel? What does it feel like to, that confirmation from the Lord when you know that God is speaking to you, and he's, pointing you in a direction and he's affirming things, you're kind of speaking into that now, like how that feels.
I think one of the most important things that my husband and I talk about is discernment. And it's hard to explain, especially when we're talking to youth about it. How do you know when God's speaking to you? Because it's not always going to be that verbal. You're not always going to hear that voice that you think you're going to hear, that deep voice come out of nowhere. Right. You never hear it. But when you're in tune with God, sometimes it's just that it feels right. It's just like you can do something and you can be a little cautious and scared, but then other times you can do something and it feels like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
And your heart is in a posture of seeking the Lord. It's not distracted by doing what you want to do, which is what you said. You came to a point where you couldn't do things on your own, and it wasn't about you. It's about what the Lord wanted and seeking his voice in that.
Yeah. Yep. So I think some of my best advice for someone who might be in a place where they are going back and forth on their faith, or they're just trying to figure out God's purpose for them, is just, of course, surrender. Just give it all to him. Bury yourself in the scripture as much as you can, and he will bring those answers to you. It's not going to be always in a the most obvious ways, like we said, it's just going to be in the confirmation. For me, a lot of God speaking to me was conviction. And I'm so thankful. At the time, I was not happy about it, that everything I did, I would feel convicted about because I knew what I should be doing. But I think at one point I had um, let myself become of the world and not in the world like I should be. I was conforming to the world, and I wasn't being transformed by God.
And can you speak a little bit into the distinction between conviction from the Lord and shame of the enemy? Because those two are very different things, right?
Yes, they are. I don't think that, well, I know that God never intends to shame us. So I think with conviction is, I think that's kind of personal in my own head. I don't even know for sure that I think God was convicting me. It was things that he had taught me, words that he, had ingrained in my heart. And I knew that the things that I was doing, I guess I felt guilty in my own self. And I kind of think about, when Jesus carried that cross for us, and as much as he sacrificed, and I would have to remind myself of that, like this one little thing of getting up at, 7:00 in the morning to go to church on Sundays and getting the kids up and everybody getting dressed is nothing compared to what he did for us.
Yeah.
So
would you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, would you say that this conviction and this feeling of guilt was motivated from a place of longing and love for the Lord?
Oh, yeah.
It's because you knew you belonged to him, and he was where you needed to be. And so just like when we hurt someone that we love, that brings kind of that feeling of, oh, I feel bad because I really love this person.
Right.
It's the same kind of feeling versus I'm doing this because I feel bad, but not really. It's like I still want to do it, and that's a totally separate thing.
Right.
So it sounds to me like your love for the Lord really, you really pursued the Lord in the midst of that because you knew that you belonged to him, that's where you needed to be.
Yeah, and that was he was my safe haven through everything that I went through. I knew that I could always, there were times when I felt like maybe I had gone too far and that he may have left my side, but looking back on it, of course, I know he never left my side. I was the one that grew distant from him, that he was always there waiting. And that's the biggest thing that I would hope to get through to you teenagers or anybody just struggling right now, is that he will always, there's nothing that you can do that he won't forgive. So, because he loves us so much, he doesn't, he doesn't have a little tracker up in heaven where he's saying she's done this sin and that sin.
That's not who he is.
Yeah, he wipes it all clean, and every day is a new chance, a new opportunity to follow his will and to wipe that slate clean.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I have just kind of one more question, and however the Lord prompts you to speak into this, but going on this theme and this question of why you chose Jesus. I mean, I think you really addressed it in many ways. But if you could go back to a specific moment in your life, a specific turning point, like this was the moment, and this is what it felt like when I chose Jesus, and why. How would you describe that?
One specific moment.
Maybe there's several, and so could you pick one of?
I think the one that stands out most to me is, like I said, when I would send my kids on the church van in the morning, and I would sit at home and cry. I think it was that Sunday that I actually took the step and went back to church, because sometimes Christians can be mean, or church people can be mean. So I was afraid of what they would say to me, because you just feel like you're going to be judged. But the fact that I prayed and prayed about it before I went back, and that I was welcomed back with open arms at the core, and nobody, just like God, nobody came to me and said, "Where have you been the past however long?"
Wow.
And that I think the extension of Christ that the church family showed me when I came back was what confirmed for me that I can't live this life without Christ. And I just told myself that I would never try to again. So,
Wow. Well, thank you so much.
thank you for having me.
That's an incredible story, and I sense that the Lord is just continuing His work through you, and your love for young people, your heart to really share God's love that you've experienced for yourself with the young people of your core, of the division, and anyone, like you said, anyone that's not really experienced God in the way that we know Him. I can see that passion and that desire.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for
Thank you.
just being vulnerable and opening up your experience and your story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hi guys, thank you for tuning in to Soul Sessions. If you enjoyed this interview, we ask that you like it and share it with others, and join us for next time.